Hey, I'd like to welcome you to another episode of Mission Matters. My name is Adam Torres, and if you'd like to apply to be a guest on the show, just head on over to missionmatters.com and click on Be Our Guest to apply. All right, so did I have Frank Pereira on the line, and he's managing partner of Coleman Consulting Group. Frank, welcome to the show.
Hi, Adam. Thanks for having me on the show today.
All right, Frank. So we have a lot to cover today and excited to go into what you're doing over at Coleman Consulting Group. But just to get us kicked off, we'll start with our Mission Matters Minute. So, Frank, we at Mission Matters, we amplify stories for entrepreneurs, executives, and experts. So that's our mission here. Frank, what mission matters to you?
What matters to us is getting the right schedule into organizations around the world. And what we find out is many organizations work schedules that have been working forever, and they're not the right ones. And so we find out, hey, can we get something better? Why do we care? Because the right schedule means you can save a lot of money. Mm-hmm. And in today's world, we're going to talk a lot about employee retention and how do we help that part of the supply chain. The right schedule means you're going to retain your employees. Mm-hmm. People are going to want to stay. And when I say schedule, before you turn off what you think what that is, as we interpret a schedule, it means almost everything about where you go to work. It's not just what day you show up and how many hours you work like a shift worker, but it's also how does your vacation work? When somebody doesn't show up, who comes in to fill the hole? How do you take vacation? Yeah. When there's extra work, do you have to show up? Can you trade shifts with other people? All those things are part of what we call your schedule because it's really important to just about everybody.
Yeah, that's a big deal, Frank. And I know some of the people that are listening to this are probably like, schedule? What? Like, how's that going to do something? And we're not going to spoil it for them yet because you have some stories and some things that you've done in your career with this that I know when we were warming up for this and when we were preparing for the interview, I was shocked. I didn't know how much of a difference that like a schedule and matching what your employees are looking for can make to the business. But before we go further into there, like how did you get started on this path? Like, tell us a little bit more about your background.
So I've had two jobs. I was a naval officer. I graduated from the Naval Academy. I'm a nuclear engineer. I've got all the right number stuff behind me. And I was finishing up my MBA at Berkeley, and I answered an ad in the paper for this crazy little company in Marin County, north of the Golden Gate Bridge. And it's the only other job I've ever had. I've been doing it for the last 27 years. I've literally talked to tens of thousands of people, worked with hundreds of companies, and we have just a great team of consultants that change people's lives. And it's hard for me to leave. I love what I'm doing.
It's amazing. And when I think about like Coleman Consulting Group and what you're doing for people, and when we were looking at this, like a lot of people are like, oh, I did this, I did that, or they might have had these privileges. And I'm like, wait a minute. So you are arguably one of the most experienced people in this space. The amount of time, the amount of clients you've worked with, the size of the clients you've worked with, from really large enterprise to, your mid-sized clients. I mean, you've pretty much seen it all through these years.
And that's true. So we work with private sector, public sector. About 80% of our business is here in the United States. We have gigantic companies like Exxon or ConAgra, General Mills, and we've worked with smaller companies. We've worked with companies as small as 5 or 6 people. Because schedules matter to everybody.
Yeah. And so, and I wanted to tee that up first and give a little bit of your background and why you're such an expert in the field before we went further. So now let's think about the overall landscape. So right now, when we think about retaining hourly workers and what that looks like. So a lot of churn in workforce, a lot of different things happening. So when we're recording this right now, October of 2021. So lots of changes going on, whether it's the pandemic or otherwise, that have caused people to change positions. Like, what are you seeing from your vantage point?
I just know in the last 6 months, our phone has been ringing off the hook with companies trying to retain people. We are doing as many projects as we possibly can. Why? Because if you can change schedules, you can keep them. One of my clients from Ohio said, look, you raise people's wage to bring them in the door. But if you want to keep them, you got to change schedules. And typically we'll improve retention by 50%. In today's world, that's it. I know there's a lot of supply chain issues. There's a lot of reasons systemically why people aren't showing up for work. We can blame the fact that they're getting a paycheck to stay home. If we're talking about hourly workers, we can talk about the pandemic, change the philosophy. We can even blame the newest generation saying, hey, these kids don't want to work, right? Which, by the way, every generation is blamed the generation behind them.
Fact.
But really, it's just the way it is. But really is, can we fix how people work and find them a schedule that makes sense for them? Because if we can, if we can find out something, but let me digress first. And can I tell you the reason I think schedules are so important? And I think this is what probably hooked you when you and I talked, is, are we talking schedules? Are we talking about shift workers? Are we talking about the police department working in the middle of the night?
Yeah.
No, I'm talking to everybody, including you and I and everybody listening to this podcast. If you think about it, we spend, typically on a day, we spend the majority of our waking hours at work, getting ready to go to work, taking a shower, driving in, all that stuff is spent at work. We build our whole lives. Everything that you think is important to you outside of work, right? Your friends, your family, your kids, your significant other, spouse, whoever, all those things happen in the little holes where you're not working. In that less than 50% of the time of your life, you're fitting it in. You end up meeting your spouse, you end up getting married, you end up having kids, you end up raising those kids. That all happens in sort of the negative spaces of your schedule.
Yeah.
I don't care if you're working in an office or you're an executive or you're a coal miner. All those people have the exact same issue. You and I are worried about it too. Am I getting enough time off to see my kids? How does that work? So those things are very, very important. Most schedules that people have today, where do they come from? No, they were just copied in. That's just the way we've always done it. We have one competitor really in this space. You. Everybody builds their own work schedule. Every company, this is the way we're going to work. Well, how do you do it? Did you ever bring in somebody who's actually has a way to look at totally different way of doing things? Let's find different ways of doing things. Let's find things that make sense. And different isn't always right. Right? It's not always about getting something new. But can we look at the gamut of possibilities and see what people would like and what people wouldn't like? Look at the Uber drivers. People love that schedule. Why? They have an amazing amount of flexibility. And if we would have thought of essentially taxi drivers showing up at oddballs, it would never work.
Yeah.
Right? But all of a sudden today it works. And when the companies I know here in California, the state was going to change some of the legislature to force sort of that whole industry to stop. And it wasn't the industry fighting. It was the employees saying, please, I need this to work for me.
Yeah.
I don't fit in traditional schedules. Today, 3 weeks ago, I was at a big window manufacturer in Florida, and they are having a tremendous problem with turnover, which we're helping on. We're just finished surveying the employees and figuring out what we can do for them. And the president of the company at the end of the meeting called me aside and he said, look, Frank, we cannot continue to do things the way we've traditionally done it. It's not the 40 hours a week. Show up for your 8-hour shift or your 10-hour shift. And if you don't show up, if you're late, I'm going to give you a half a point. If you skip the day, I'm going to give you 2 points. And I'm going to jack up the absenteeism policy. That's just not working because people are leaving. And I'm seeing companies 3 years ago, if you had 20% turnover, you would call me, you were worried. I have companies today with 200% turnover.
Wow.
And it's unbelievable numbers, right? So you have 100 employees, you see 200 new employees a year. Now, that doesn't mean you switch everybody. So what that means is of those 100, maybe there's 20 or 30 people that will constantly, it's that churn of the young people, or not so young, but the newer people that are coming and leaving. Why? Because every schedule's got good and bad things, right? If you think about if you're a restaurant, right? Everybody wants to work during the week. Nobody wants to work on the weekends.
Right.
Unless you're looking for tips. Well, it might be better on the weekends, right? But nobody wants to work the weekends, or nobody wants to work the middle of the night. So who do we do? What do? We give that to the junior person. You just walk in the door. You got to do this first. No kidding. Those people are leaving constantly, right? Right. And if there's less pressure on it, and I can still get paid because maybe I'm getting a little check for, the unemployment benefits have been extended or whatever. So I'm willing to, I may not even make as much money, but I'm willing to leave for those kind of things. You can actually raise my wage. And again, I might come in the door, but if I'm working in the middle of the night, I'm not seeing my kids. Are you kidding me? I'm gone. And I rambled. Does that help, Adam?
No, tremendously. And so an example of this, because so those numbers you shared, first off, are shocking. So, 200% turnover, that people are calling, originally with 20%, like you got a problem. So, what does it look like? Because first thing is, especially the window one, I think that was a perfect example. So when traditionally, if I'm thinking about the window side of things, I'm thinking, okay, there's a very set amount of hours they can work. This isn't like an Uber driver, right? They're not going to be working, at 10 p.m., 11 p.m. at night, right? So that being said, I know some people are watching this right now and they're like, well, scheduling, I've always had this schedule. We've always done it this way. I feel like that's a trap that a lot of people are falling into right now, that are a reason why for some of the turnover maybe they're experiencing. So take us a little bit further down that user journey. So first off, you mentioned a survey. Tell me a little bit more about the process and what that survey entails, because that's where it sounds like it starts when it comes to an engagement.
So the first thing we do, even before we survey anybody, is you got to figure out what the possibilities are.
Yeah.
Right. And we've been surveying people long enough to understand that the real answer is not what to ask, but to be careful what not to ask. Right. Because the sky might not be the limit. Mm-hmm. Right. You mentioned, if I'm a manufacturer, I can't have everybody working Monday through Friday day shift if I have to operate 24 hours a day. Right. So I have to be careful how I ask these questions and how I word these questions. Mm-hmm. But so we have to do a little bit of analysis on what's possible. Once we understand that, absolutely, the next piece is the survey. Mm-hmm. And we have the largest proctored employee database in the world, hundreds of thousands of people that we've surveyed around the world for typically about an hour and a half. And we ask them all sorts of things about how they like to work and how they don't like to work. Yeah. And results are of different schedules on, for example, health statistics and things like that. We know a lot. The survey, more important than knowing what a lot of people like, I need to know what your people like, or your organization. If there's 30 of you there, what do you guys like? Do you like one of the more important things people like is to get more days off. Mm-hmm. To get more days off with the same paycheck, you got to work more hours on the days that you do work. So that's the big example is the 4 10-hour shifts instead of the 5 8s. Mm-hmm. Not for everybody. But there's certainly a significant portion of the population that say, hey, I'm willing to give up 2 hours of my personal time every day to get an extra day off every week, or it's extra 50 days off a year. There might be a group that likes that. There might be groups that don't. It has to fit with the business, though. You can't decide you're going to work 4 days a week and nobody's going to work on Friday, right? Some companies can, some companies can't. You could also work 10-hour shifts 24/7, 7 days a week if you're one of those plans. And we have clients that are actually doing that. It requires, some systems in place and things to work. But if you have the right skills and everything else, again, so what we do is we find out what the possibilities are. Then we go out and survey people. People takes like an hour and a half to survey people. We find out what they like and what they don't like. Then we go away, and typically 2 weeks later, we come back and say, this is what you told us. I want to make sure I got it right. All surveys, we ask questions that are similar. And if you ask this way on this one should be the same way. But what happens if you ask this one this way and this one's the other way? Something's going on here. Yeah. And I need to get room 2 weeks later and go, can you guys tell me, why did you do this? And it's interesting. Workforces always surprise you, right? And then once you understand what they like, and we looked at the business drivers, now we can go ahead and create options that make sense for the employees, right? Often the driver for the hardest part of change is not the employees. The hardest part of change is always going to be, we can't do that. We've never done that before. We need to change this HR rule. Oh my God, we got to go to corporate, right? So we got to get through those issues, got to work through them. Now, I advise clients, though, if you're going to go ahead and survey employees, you better make sure you're going to listen to them, right? There was a good article that came out last week in Inc. Inc. magazine that talked about the fact that why are people leaving? Because we don't listen to them. This is a company that they were quoting a survey of 2,000 full-time and part-time workers and why they were actually leaving companies. And organizations do ask us what we want, but nobody listens to us. So if you're going to talk about schedules, which, by the way, most engagement surveys out there, work schedules is near the top. If you're going to go ahead and ask people about it, better be ready to listen to them and make a change, right? It doesn't mean everybody gets what they want. But they have to understand that there's a process, and we take them through the process. And If we do it right, again, the results speak for themselves. We can cut turnover in half, right? Retention, people will stay for schedules that make sense. Let me take you to some specific examples of what makes sense for people. Here's a positive one. Well, or I guess a negative one. A lot of companies today, you get to the end of your day and your boss says, boy, it was more work than we expected. We sold. That's great news. Everybody's going to have to stay an extra 10 minutes or an extra half an hour. Sounds good. Positive from a company's doing great. If I'm a single parent and I have to go pick up my daughter at 3 o'clock and my shift ends at 2:45 and I can't pick her up, how long am I going to stay at that company? Because what's my daughter thinking? Dad, you don't love me? Yeah. Why weren't you here? Right? If she's 6 years old or 5 years, she has no idea. She just knows, but I had this extra, she doesn't care. She just knows that her father didn't pick her up, right? How long am I going to stay at that company? Not too long. By the way, that has nothing to do with what people can traditionally consider your schedule. It's about predictability. How do we ensure that there's some predictability at the end of the shift? If we need to be flexible, how do we ensure the flexibility makes sense for us, right? So we want to make sure we have those kind of pieces going today. I'll tell you, today in companies, if you think about what's happening with employees, to me, it doesn't surprise me people are leaving. Typical manufacturer in the United States, and it's not just in manufacturing, in a number of different industries. They work Monday through Friday, and then they get to, and because we've eliminated a lot of the pieces of the supply chain, a lot of the warehouses, right? The consultants have been in there, gotten rid of the warehouses. They've gotten rid of a lot of the sort of the extra stuff that we can kind of flex between what we make, whether it's a good or a service, and our customers, right? So there's no gap there. So what happens when people do really well and they sell more? You get to Thursday and the company goes, wow, we're really kicking it this week, guys. You're gonna have to work Saturday and probably Sunday.
That's your reward for a job well done, right?
Give me an employee. I don't want that. Right? I'm having to work hard. Now I got to come in on the weekend. I was coaching this weekend. I was going to some. Yeah. Frank, you got to work. And of course, your worst employees will play the game and work on absenteeism and skip things, right? Right. In the end, you end up riding the best horses to the ground. To your best employees, they always feel like I'm committed to the company. I'm going to do whatever. Yeah. They're showing up every Saturday, every Sunday, working longer hours. Right? Yeah. And then, by the way, it also goes the other way. We get to Thursday and we had a rough week. Oh, guys, we don't have any work for you on Saturday, but matter of fact, we don't have any work for you tomorrow, so just stay home. Yeah. So now you're an hourly worker. You just lost 20% of your work week, right? Wow. You just lost your paycheck. How long can you stay there, right? There are companies that do this regularly. Right? I can't tell you how many companies I've been to these days that work people 13 in a row, 21 in a row, right? And it's a disaster, right? And if you start doing that, no kidding, turnover is going to happen. And usually in those cases, again, they try to protect senior workers, and now the junior people are coming in. By the way, you come to work and you're working 12 hours just for the next 30 days, right? And it's a nightmare. Now, what's the right answer? I don't know. Every site is slightly different. By the way, I don't think that legislation is ever the right answer here. There's been a number of attempts. Nightmare, right? It's like trying to operate with a sledgehammer. You can't do it, right? You need to figure out what people like, what they don't, what's the situation at a specific plant. There are some companies that need tremendous amount of flexibility. They have a tremendous amount of flexibility. We have a company in LA. People work, they're scheduled to cover like 56 hours a week. They get a full paycheck. Sometimes they only work 20 hours that week. They have like 2 or 3 days they have to come to work. The rest of the time they're on call. If they come in on call, they get paid a bunch of money. While they're on call, they can't go to Tijuana. They're in LA. They can't go to Tijuana. They can't go offshore 5 miles. They can't tie one on. They have to be ready to come to work within an hour and a half. But that's a company that flexes from 2 people to 40 people with 2 hours notice. Wow. Right? I mean, nobody has more flexibility than anything I've seen or needs flexibility. So rather than build in traditional schedules, which is what they had when we got there, and having this huge workforce that was very unhappy, we were able to, with the workforce they had, get more work done, get people more time off, people actually making more money, and the company's more successful. How do you make that a win-win? Those are win-wins. Why are we shooting for more of those?
And so I feel like And so I feel like for some people that are going down this path, like when we started the interview, you mentioned like you have to know what questions not to ask because there's going to be some flexibility in that. So you don't want to, you're not riling up your workforce and creating a situation to where maybe you're having them ask for something that's just not physically possible based on your type of business and business constraints. So that's not the point. The point is that as you go through this process within parameters, that possibly they're going to find some maybe unexpected outcomes in terms of those surveys. Like, for example, maybe there's people that would prefer to work on the weekend versus not, or vice versa. There's people that can't necessarily work on the weekend, but like during the weekdays, they could work those longer shifts. Now, I know you mentioned that every employer is going to be a little bit different, every business, of course, but can you give me just an example of maybe something like that would fit the parameters of more a more common result of one of these surveys versus the one that you mentioned a moment ago with, flex from 2 to 40. That's not going to be for most companies, but something that just after you go through these surveys, you're like, okay, that fits in the parameters of what I thought could happen for just your normal manufacturing or otherwise company.
Sure. I mean, there's plenty of examples. Let me take you through one. A brewing department. I always love working with beer. I worked with a brewer recently who was just killing it. Great. They're doing great. But what that meant is a company that went from Monday to Friday with a little bit of weekend overtime that employees liked. They ended up going to a point where they had about 75% coverage on the weekends. And employees were not showing up. They were starting to play, they pull all the levers possible. They use all the absenteeism possible, FMLA, right? All the different rules. And so weekend coverage was very, very hard. The employees were upset. Turnover was an issue, which is pretty rare in a brewery. And it was a pretty big group, about 60 or 70 people working in this department, which is the brewing department. So we went out and surveyed the employees, and we found out there were a bunch of people that wouldn't mind working longer shifts or working the weekend if they could get a big break the next week, or they could get more time off. So in the end, what we did is we put about half the employees on a 12-hour, 7-day schedule with 8 rotated shifts.
Yeah.
There was a day shift that basically worked a 2-on, 2-off operation where they worked 2 days on, 2 days off. They ended up getting 180 days off a year.
Wow.
Think about that. If you work Monday through Friday, you get 52 weeks times 2 days, you get 104 days off. They get 180 days off a year. They work 180 days. They get half the year off, right?
Yeah.
Oh my, it's incredible. So they love that. Now they had to work half the weekends, but they typically were on for 2 days. They were off for 2 days. Now on 2, off 2 for a day shift is great. For a night shift, it's a disaster because because what do you do on your days off? You become a day person, right? There's no real fixed night shift. Night shift people become day shift people.
Yeah.
That wouldn't work. So the night shift people said, hey, we'll work 12-hour shifts, but we need to get a 4 to 5 day break. So we built 4 and 5 day breaks into their schedule. So they got good recovery time. They got these big breaks, and they were also able to cover some of the weekend overtime. Now that's half the people. The other half of the people we left Monday through Friday. They work an 8-hour. There's some 10-hour shifts. They're mostly 8-hour shifts Monday through Friday, and they cover traditional. When we went to go ahead and the employees developed the solution themselves. We went ahead and implement. Initially, there were slightly more people that wanted the 8-hour shifts than were willing to take a chance on the 12-hour shift, 7-day schedule. Things are new. Most of I think are from Missouri. We want to see it first before we do it. Right? so we got about. I think it was about 50 or 60 people. So about 30 of them went on the 12-hour shift, 7 days a week. About 30 of them went on the 8-hour shifts. The last couple people, and they did it in order of seniority, the last couple people we had to force to 12-hour shifts. Today, if you go to that brewery, unless you have 10 years experience, you have no hope of getting on the 12-hour shift. That is the premier shift, not just for the brewing department, for the entire site. Everybody wants to go work there. Why? Because you get more days off. Right.
Wow.
And they still have the same overtime opportunities. And again, it's not for everybody. If it's not for you, no problem. Work Monday through Friday. I just know if you're junior, you're starting Monday through Friday.
No, that's awesome. And you just now took me back to like early in my career. I even forgot this. Like I used to work a 3 by 12 overnight shift in finance. And we take when I worked for I think it was Charles Schwab when I worked for them a long time ago. And it was and I take calls like overnight and we're working with like Japan and like just all the people that would call like overnight. And I remember that and I had so much time off. How do I gotta talk to the other co-founder. How do I get that again? It's not happening. But you're right. And that was like one of those shifts that once I could get it, I was so excited about it. I had so much time off. Oh, sorry for the detour here, but you just reminded me like shifts do matter. And I remember thinking about that point in time in my life. And that actually did keep me at that employer much longer. And before I moved on to another position there, otherwise I maybe would not have stayed. So that's interesting. I was probably on that shift for like 2 years or at least a year and a half, something like that. So changing shifts and schedules, I didn't think I had a relatable story. I do. And that did keep me there. So I think it's a huge difference that it makes.
And I love the fact that it's not you weren't making widgets. You weren't in an order line. You're in an office, right? Schedules matter to everybody.
Oh yeah, no, that was, I mean, I had my series 6, 7, 63. I mean, you name it. I was, so I was a finance guy. So that's not, that's just an example. So good point there. So I want to go further into Coleman Consulting Group. So obviously we've talked a little bit about it, but maybe let's go a little bit further. Like what type of clients do you typically work with and who gets the most value?
Well, typically from a value perspective, and today we're talking about retention. Yeah. But the reason people hire us is because we save companies money. 80% of our business comes from word of mouth or rehires within the same company. So we'll go from one site to another. And typically our savings are 6 to 22% of total labor budget. I say that with a straight face. It's hard to believe I say that. That is a huge number.
It's huge.
Imagine you have 100 people or 1,000 people in your plant. 22%, if you're on the far end of that, and you have to kind of be broken to be on that far end. But if you're on the far end of that, with 800 people, you're producing just as much as with 1,000.
Wow.
And you can do it by unlocking when there's idle time in most plants. Again, most people don't build a schedule from the beginning. As William Shatner was in the news, Captain Kirk just last week, right? He went into outer space. And when I first started at Coleman, I went to work for Dr. Richard Coleman, who founded the company at a Stanford sleep clinic, and definitely a great understanding sleep, but really understanding businesses. And Richard said to me, Frank, when you go into a plant, before you do anything, before you talk to anybody, talk to the operations people, ask them how they want to work, and imagine people are from the Starship Enterprise. And if you need them, you beam them down. If you don't need them, you beam them back up to Captain Kirk, right? And that's the way you should build your schedule to begin with, right? And how would you, if you're working in a place where you're making glass and the cycle of the glass is 50 hours, why are we talking about a 24-hour day, right? Why are we looking at 50-hour schedules? I know that sounds crazy, but if you can do it, you can, one, save an amazing amount of money. And two, that way you can build people incredible schedules. Because what upsets employees, I think there's so many things that get them. One thing that really upsets them is when they're short-staffed, right? I need 10 people and there's only 8 here. We're suffering. As much as that upsets employees, overstaffing probably upsets them more. You need 10 and you got 12. And now it's Saturday night and I want to go see my kid's football game. He's playing football tonight, but I can't be here. There's only 10 of us need to be here. There's 2 extra people. Why am I here? Right? Yeah. And that can get people just as upset. So if you can figure out, hey, what is the work you actually need? Let's build the schedules around work. And now let's get into what can make sense for employees. Does that make sense?
Oh man, totally does. And so what type of industries? Is it industry agnostic? I mean, at this point, I know you've been in this business for a long time, but just to give a feel, like, are you working with startups as well? Like, give me a little bit more on the industry side of things.
Startups, yeah, we just did a startup with a chip maker. A lot of traditional companies, General Motors, Toyota, General Mills, a lot of food industries because they have a up and down. A lot of times when you're close to the customer, so we're talking right now to a framing company where they make frames for people, right? So you make frames for people. Well, that means people are ordering frames. So I got to be right next to the customer. So my workload is going up. How do you deal with that? government, DMV, Army Corps of Engineers.
Mm-hmm.
DMV, hard to believe. I know you go, wow, what's going on there? But through the pandemic, we were actually able to help California DMV increase some of the people that they were actually dealing with. And their turnover issues, not even turnover issues, their absenteeism issues were tremendous.
Oh, yeah.
Because they're right next to the customer through the COVID pandemic. And how do you do that if you cut the windows? And what kind of service can you offer? I mentioned a couple of services. Utilities is basically where we started. Mining, you name it, we're there. And Richard Coleman used to call me the village peddler. We're kind of like the peddler. We'll go over to the mining industry, and they're doing something. Well, on the other side, I was working at a plastics plant where they were covering every time somebody was making a part. When they went on a break, there was this person that would come over and cover for them. So they'd have coverage through the breaks and lunches. This is a plastic plant that made plastic parts for cars. And the auto industry is cutthroat as far as the margins are razor thin.
Yeah.
Some of these company part suppliers. And so they're making, every penny matters.
Yeah.
And so then a week later, I found myself in Colombia in one of the largest open cut mines in the world, gigantic facility. And I'm like, when they stop these things over at the plastics plant, they bring in a guy to run it. Well, when you're a guy who's driving this 300-ton truck the size of a house, when he decides to stop for lunch, what if we put a driver in and it drives for 30 minutes? Well, that's right. That's impossible. Nobody in their right mind would ever do that. Today, they're doing it with $22 million more in the bank. Okay, so that's the kind of numbers you can get out of that. Now, did they have to spend some of that to get the extra drivers? Absolutely. Did they have to build like little work sheds for people to be able to, with a microwave and a little fridge for them to stop and be able to eat while they could, while somebody else drove their truck? Absolutely. They have to get through all the safety requirements because for me to just jump in the truck, I have to go look around. I have to make sure everything's right. I mean, these are big, big machines. I can't just pull a guy off the street and just start driving. So how did you do that? But if you did that, again, $22 million is a lot of money, right?
Amazing.
How do you can change people's lives. And the employees, what do they think? Absolutely, they love it, right? Because when I'm taking a break, you're another truck. You and I are sitting there talking for a couple minutes while somebody else is driving our truck. We're happy to, right? And then we jump back in the truck and off we go.
That's awesome. It makes total sense. And I like that example because it just lets people know that there's a way to rethink the way you're doing business, possibly that maybe you haven't thought about in the past. And that could equal some like real revenue there or real savings either way. So this is, first off, Frank, this has been great. Like I learned a lot. I'm sure my audience did as well. What's next? What's next for you? What's next for Coleman Consulting Group?
Well, to us, it's, when you mentioned something earlier, I almost interrupted you when you said something about Uber, those drivers would never work for a factory. Well, I'll tell you what, I'm thinking about that. And I've got 3 big clients where we're in the throes of talking to employees right now and seeing if we maybe work some of that kind of magic. Right?
Wow.
Why can't you? Let's think about it, right? Now, if you're a manufacturer, it's kind of scary. You want to make sure that you have your people there however many hours you're working, right? It's 10 o'clock. You need to have 25 people on your line making chairs or whatever, right? And if 23 show up, you're in trouble. Right? Well, you have systems to make sure people show up anyway, right? We can always maybe force in overtime or something. But what if we took a couple of those shifts and made them sign-up shifts? Yeah. And and on your phone, you can have an application that says, hey, Frank, we have these 5 shifts you can sign up for the week. Oh, and as long as I'm qualified, you as the owner, I got to make sure that I'm qualified. And as long as I'm, good standing and whatever, I have all the paperwork and everything else. Yeah. What if I sign up for my shifts? What if there's 20 of us and we sign up so that every night 2 or 3 of us show up a night, right? And if I don't sign up in time, maybe I get forced. Now we got to get into all the rules, right? How does that actually work? Oh, by the way, if we are going to go ahead and send it to me on my phone, next week's schedules come open at 9 o'clock. But what if all of a sudden, next week's schedule's open 9 o'clock, but I'm a regular guy. But Adam, you have no problem with absenteeism. You always show up. You meet your quality goals. You get it at 8:30. You get a benefit for being better, right? So all of a sudden, or maybe do it by seniority, whatever. But we can go ahead and say, hey, who gets these shifts? And you can get to sign up for them. It can be like the airlines. Hey, I get to sign up for 20 shifts a week or a month or whatever shifts I sign up per month. And those shifts, maybe, I don't know, 10% of them have to be on the weekend.
Yeah.
Or 10% of them have to be at night, right? So we can go ahead and make sure we distribute our rules around a little bit, right? Could we do that? Well, most traditional manufacturing, operations manager or someone who's kind of come up in the ranks, you're saying, no, this is never going to work. I'd argue, why not? Right? Why not? We just have to think about, and let's before we say, well, it's not us that are working it. Let's find out if the employees are interested. Because if they are interested, and we can get this small group to do that, because Uber, when I show up at the airport at midnight, somehow there's an Uber driver there.
Oh, for sure.
Right? There's somebody there. And that guy doesn't work 8 hours every day, whatever, but maybe, and by the way, these shifts don't have to be 8-hour shifts. They could be 4-hour shifts, 5-hour shifts. I don't know, right? Again, we're just starting to think about this. Why can't we get there for manufacturing the way we're at there with these other clients? And I think we can. So to me, that's the kind of exciting things you can do. A lot of it has to do with, do we have the software ability to do that? And there's also a lot of, I didn't talk too much about software, but traditionally people have not been able to trade shifts, right? It's a hard thing to do because if I want to trade with Rebecca, you're my supervisor, you got to okay it. Does she have my skills? It takes forever. As my supervisor, you don't want your supervisors doing that. You want your supervisor doing other stuff. But with these software machines we got today, and if Rebecca and I have the same skills, let the machine decide, right? Yeah. Again, if it's not working for you, let's change the game, right? Let's make sure the rules are right. But anyhow, so those are some of the things we see coming out there. I continue to be surprised by employees, but what they like and what they don't like. They teach me a lot. I would like to. I also just get great stories. Very enthusiastic about talking about it. Can I give you a couple of quick stories on employees right now? So, I was working at a bottling manufacturer down in Ohio, and they were working these just like I talked about before, Monday through Friday, traditional shifts, and they have a lot of weekend work. And so we ended up putting them on this 8-week rotation. It had some 8 and 12-hour shifts mixed together, and they ended up rotating through it. And the employees would get an 8-day break once every 7 weeks. What the employees wanted. They had to work on the other side, and the pay was equal, and nobody made any money on it, right? But it would be, if you went to this operation, you got an 8-day schedule an 8-day break every 7 weeks. And so it was pretty positive. It was good implementation. I was kind of excited about it. Then I was away for a while. I went back about 3 months later, and I walk into the warehouse, and this guy on the far side of the warehouse has got a forklift. He jumps in his forklift, turns it at me, and he rides straight at me, right? This big forklift. I'm thinking, he's going to run me over, right? And I can see he's agitated. He jumps out of his forklift, and he's all fired up. He can't even speak. He's screaming at me, right? And he's reaching back. And I'm like, oh, my God, was he a knife, a gun? I'm definitely dead, right? Somehow he hates the schedule. And he pulls it out, and he pulls out his wallet. He has one of those wallets with the pictures that come out. Yeah. Right? Those old-fashioned ones you see in cartoons. He goes, he's got these pictures. He's like, Frank, look at this. My first 8-day break, I took my kids down to, he was in Ohio, I took my kids down to the banks. We went fishing. My kid caught a shark. Look at this, right? Oh, my gosh. So excited about his schedule, right? And this is a forklift driver in a plant in Columbus, Ohio. Yeah. He's excited about change this guy's game. I've had people telling me, hey, new schedules have changed, have saved my marriage, right? Wow. Because they can actually meet people. But I think I have so many like this. This is why I do this. No, this is awesome. I'll give you one more. One always sticks in my mind. I was working in a big plant in Mexico, a cell phone plant, and there were 2,000 people at this plant making cell phones, and it was mostly a female workforce, and there was a group of employees. They were doing something probably like you were doing, like a 3-4, 4-3 type schedule. Yeah. But there was a group that worked every weekend, and I'm not a big fan of weekend warriors. So you're not gonna if you have a weekend warrior schedule and you're thinking about implementing it, call me. I'll talk you out of it. Right? It's not. I don't care how much you think you know about it. If you don't believe me, I'll hook you up with people that are failed. Right? So these guys, they had this big group of employees. About 500 of them were working weekends. And so we went in there and we changed the schedules a little bit. And And a couple months later, I was there with one of my partners, and we're walking down the floor, and I felt like a rock star, right? I had these, it was mostly Mexican women, a lot of older women, like grandmas worked there, right? And I had these two grandmas, and they're coming up to me, and of course, everything's Spanish, and I speak the language. They're like, thank you, thank you, thank you. Before you guys ever came here, I was dead to my grandchildren.
Wow.
I never saw them. Now I spend every other weekend with them. They have a grandmother.
Yeah.
And while she's saying this, they're crying, right, as they're talking to me. And I've always been touched by that kind of thing. If we can change people's lives, forget about the $20 million. If we can change people's, why aren't we doing it? Why, as leaders of organizations, we should be doing this. By the way, changing their schedules, getting those people to stick, all that's going to make the company better. It's going to make the people produce more. They're going to want to work harder. You're going to save all the money. But if we can change their lives, that alone is worth it, right? That alone is worth it. And that's why I do what I do.
Man, I'll tell you, it's inspiring. It's inspiring because I think what it does is it really connects people to understand that these schedules and what we do at work and, showing up, and that, after work, we have families, we have other things going on. And obviously you have to earn money, you have to pay for bills, you have to, do what you have to do to survive, and to thrive. But, if you can make somebody's life better, like hearing that story about like this guy being able to take his kids fishing, like all those other things, when you want to talk about like employee turnover or retention, or if you just want to even talk about, saving money, like what you're talking about, and having longer term employees, so maybe even not needing the same amount that you would normally need, like all those different benefits that you said, like that's the way to do it. Like that's what your data is showing. That's what all your experience is shown. And that's the true value here, is that you're really helping people. And that's just so mission aligned with what we like doing here. And that's why we love bringing these mission-based entrepreneurs and executives on the line, really to just talk about why they do what they do. So Frank, I have to say, so if somebody is watching this and they want to learn more about Coleman Consulting Group, what's the best way for them to follow up and to connect with you and your team?
So the best way, is probably easiest way in today's world, is to go to our website, which is www.coleman-consulting.com.
Awesome. And we'll definitely put that in the show notes as well, so that people can just click on it again. So the web address, just one more time for those that wanted to write it down.
So it's www.coleman, so COLEMAN-consulting.com. And I should also give you, we have a 1-800 number too, which is 888-823-0810.
Fantastic. Well, Frank, again, been a pleasure having you on the show today and learning more about your background and why you do what you do. And to the audience, as always, thank you for tuning in. Hope you got a lot of value out of this. Hope you learned a lot. If you did, don't forget, hit that subscribe button, especially for our new viewers and listeners. We have many more mission-based entrepreneurs, executives, and experts coming up for you, and we don't want you to miss a thing. And Frank, thanks again. It really has been a pleasure.
Thanks, Adam.